is Adrian May, and here we're going to continue our mini-series on the punctuation in the ACT and SAT exams. In the last video, we looked at semicolons, so in this video, we're going to look at colons. And the use of colons in these exams is actually quite specific. There are one or two rules that we have to know, and once we do know them, the use of colons becomes super straightforward and easy in these exams. So, essentially, colons are used to introduce a list or to introduce an example. But also, if we think about an example as a list that only has one thing in it, these are essentially the same thing. Examples and lists are basically the same thing. Now, the very specific thing about colons in these exams, however, is that they always have to be preceded by a full sentence. And this is not necessarily how everyone else uses colons. Everyone does tend to use them to introduce lists or ideas. However, it's quite rare. You see in newspapers or in other forms of magazines or literature, people do quite often use colons without having a full sentence in front of them. But for these exams, we have to do that. And so let's think about how that might look in some kind of examples and how we would or wouldn't use a colon. You could think, for example, of the sentence, I have many favourite drinks, comma, such as tea, coffee, and beer. Now, you wouldn't put a colon before the list, tea, coffee, and beer, because you wouldn't end a sentence with such as. You wouldn't say, I have many favourite drinks, comma, such as, full stop. That's not possible. So in this case, if you have something like such as before a list, you just flow straight into the list without punctuation. I have many favourite drinks, comma, such as tea, coffee, and beer. If we wanted to rewrite that sentence so that we did use a colon, we would have to turn that into a full sentence before. So we could say something like, I have many favourite drinks, full stop. And that is a full sentence. If we then want to add an appendage with a list, we could add a colon. So I have many favourite drinks, colon, tea, coffee, and beer. That is a list that now works following a full sentence where we can use a colon. Okay, if that's making sense, let's look at a few questions where we see this in action. Okay, so here's our first example from the ACT. If you want to pause the video and have a go at it yourself first, please do so. Okay, how did you do? And in this case, what we actually want is answer choice H. We do want a colon because what we have is a full sentence and then an example. So we have a document translated by researchers in 2013 revealed that workers use a surprising means of transportation. That is a full sentence. However, what follows, a sledge pulled on ice, isn't a full sentence. So we can't use a semicolon, so F is incorrect. A sledge pulled on ice is an example of what came before, so we can use a colon in that case. However, we don't want the word being here. A quick pro tip, in the ACT, if you have an answer choice with the word being in it and it feels a bit off, it's probably wrong. It's passive voice, they don't really like it. In this case, we don't need the word being. What follows is the example, and the example is simply a sledge pulled on ice. So answer choice H is going to be correct. In the next example, we have a list. What we're going to think about here is, do we have a full sentence before the list, or do we want to flow straight into the list without some punctuation? So again, I'm going to pause the video if you want, and you can have a go at it yourself. So, what did you put? And in this case, we don't need either of our semicolons because we can't put a colon after such as. That doesn't end a full sentence. You would never end a sentence saying such as. So B and C are both incorrect. And answer choice D doesn't work because the two commas would make such as a subclause. We would take that out of the sentence and we don't want that. We just want to flow straight into the list, such as photocopiers, printers and fax machines. And answer choice A does that for us. By contrast, the next question tends to trip people up quite a lot when they're trying to think about it in these terms. So I'm going to put this on screen. And again, if you want to pause it and have a go at it yourself first, please do so. And so what did you end up with? The answer choice here is actually B. We do want a colon. And what surprises people is, take Bartlett pears, for instance. That is in fact a full sentence. It's just suggesting that you think about Bartlett pears as an example. We have a verb, we have a subject, take Bartlett pears, for instance. You can put a full stop there. And then what we have following that, again, is an example. It's an example of why Bartlett pears are interesting to think about. And so we do, in fact, put a colon. And so the answer choice here is answer B. Now, in the last video, we stressed that there was a certain type of question in the SAT, the question where they ask you to effectively combine two sentences together, in which we said you cannot ever use a semicolon because a semicolon separates two full sentences from each other. And therefore, if your question asks you to combine two full sentences, using a semicolon wouldn't do that because that's effectively the same thing as a full stop. However, I just want to add here that in this particular type of question, you can use a colon because a colon isn't separating two full sentences. It's having a full sentence and then an explanation or an example afterwards. And so sometimes in this type of question, a colon is a good way to combine two sentences together, as we have in the following example. Okay, so here's a classic combining sentences question from the SAT. And one thing you might often want to do is to try and keep the flow of the sentence the most similar to what's in the actual question. And so question 24 here, we have the idea is obviously very attractive, full stop. An obscure method of photography may be made available to many with little expense. So we want to find the answer choice that best keeps that structure of the sentence. And if you want to pause the video and have a look at the answer choices before I go into it, please do that. And actually what we want here is answer choice B, because B actually keeps the sentence exactly as it is, except it replaces the full stop with a colon. And as we said in the previous video, we couldn't put a semicolon here because that wouldn't be combining two sentences. Semicolons keep sentences separate. But here we have a sentence. The idea is obviously very attractive. And then we have an example. And so putting a colon there does combine the two sentences. They are no longer two separate sentences. They are one. But the flow of the sentence remains the same. And if we look at answer choices A, C, and D, the flow of the sentences are slightly garbled and there's some repetitions. It's unclear what idea follows what, whereas we want to keep it really simple. There is this attractive idea, and then we have an example of what that is. And answer choice B best maintains the flow of that sentence. Okay, so the only last thing we really need to add is the fact that sometimes, as well as a colon to introduce a list or an example at the end of a sentence, you can also sometimes use a dash to introduce an example at the end of a sentence. So, for example, we could think of the sentence, there was only one season she loved more than winter, colon, summer. In this case, we have a full sentence and then an example. We could also use a dash in place of the colon, so we could say, there was only one season she loved more than winter, dash, summer, and this also works. Now, like in the previous video, when we said a semicolon and a full stop or a period are basically identical, these are also grammatically identical options, which means that in an exam, if they turn up as answer choices and they are grammatically identical, they would both have to be wrong because the exam isn't going to make you make a judgment call over which one is used slightly better than the other. For a multiple choice exam, an answer has to be either right or wrong. And if you have two answers that are technically identical, you wouldn't be able to choose just one of them as being right. So for some reason, they would both have to be wrong. So there'd be something grammatically wrong with the use of the dash or a colon if the answers are identical. But often you see, especially in the ACT these days, and also actually the SAT does it quite a lot now, that they'll give you two answer choices that have a dash and a colon, which seem to be used in the same way to introduce an example at the end of a sentence. However, there'll be something else wrong with one of the other answers. There'll be a comma in the wrong place or a word in the wrong place. That means one of those choices is wrong, and so the other one is correct. And so these can be probably the hardest types of colon and dash questions because they look very, very, very similar, but there will be one small difference that allows you to choose one over the other. And so let's just look at one or two examples of that in action. Okay, so we're going to look at two examples of this. Here is the first one. And again, if you want to pause the video to have a go at it yourself, please do so. Okay, so what's the situation here? Well, we actually have two full sentences. A company's success depends largely on worker morale. Full stop. A Gallup study found that productivity lost by unhappy, disengaged workers costs companies 28 grand per person annually. So in that sense, the only answer that definitely doesn't work is answer choice C, because we can't put a comma after morale because we have two full sentences there. And actually, the semicolon would work because we have two sentences either side. And also the dash or the colon could work because then we have a full sentence and then an example that follows it. The key reason why we know which answer to go for is the comma after study. It is a Gallup study that found the productivity lost by unhappy workers and so on. Our subject is the Gallup study, the verb is found, and we cannot ever separate a subject and a verb by just one comma. So any answer choice that has the comma after study is incorrect, and that leaves us with only D as the correct answer. And so here, as I said before, the dash and the colon are used in exactly the same way. They both should work in this situation. But the reason why we have to go for D is the comma after study, which is incorrect. And only D does not have that comma. So it's the right answer. And the next question is really tricksy in a very minor way. Again, pause it if you want and then have a go at it and I'll talk you through it. So what's happening in this situation is we have a text and then we have a quotation which is given an example of what came before. Now, normally if we were going to have a long quotation, we would put a colon before it. So no change already looks good, but we could put a dash before a quotation. That would also work. You could have a sentence, have a dash, and then have a quotation that is an example of what came before. A colon is more normal, but that's probably not enough to rule out answer choice B. What actually rules out answer choice B for sure is something very, very, very minor. But if you look before the, we only have one citation mark, a single quotation mark. Whereas at the end of the quotation, we have these double quotes. And this has to be consistent. If we open up a quotation with double quotation marks, we need to finish with double quotation marks. If we open a quote with only one quotation mark, we need to end up with one. And therefore B has to be incorrect because we're only using a single quotation mark at the start of the, whereas actually at the start of the quote, we need two double quotation marks. So the answer has to be A. But that's basically it. So all we need to really think about is that colons are used to introduce a list or an example, but we always need to have a full sentence before the colon to use it properly. Dashes can also be used to introduce an example. They can be a little bit more complicated because often we also use these dashes in pairs to introduce a subclause of new information into a sentence, but we're going to talk about that in the next video. So in the next video, we're going to talk about introducing subclauses, which usually involves commas, but also can involve parentheses and also these dashes. So that's the next thing we're going to look at. So I hope you find these videos useful. If you have, please of course like and subscribe to the channel. And also if you have any comments or any topics you would like me to cover that I haven't yet made videos about, please leave a comment down there and I will try and get around to it when I have the time. But also if you think you need further help with the SAT and the ACT in any form, with the math, with the grammar, with the reading, with the science, with the essays, I can help you in all these areas of the exam, and I do one-to-one lessons. This can happen in person in London or Glasgow, but most of my teaching these days I do online via Skype, so I can help you wherever in the world you are. So if you feel like you would like some one-to-one lessons, please do get in touch. My website is below and my email address is there, so hit me up and I can give you any kind of help that you need. I'll always be happy to help you. Okay, thank you for watching. Please again like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.